Hey, Jimmy Murphy here on the latest edition of the Boston Hockey Now podcast, and it's become a friend and a colleague over the years for me here. You know him from the Boston Globe, and of course, that's Hall of Fame puck scribe Kevin Paul Dupont joining me here from Chicago as the Bruins prepare to play the Chicago Blackhawks on Tuesday night. And no, I am not at Hurley's Pub in Montreal, dudes. That's just the wonderful beauty of green screen. Figured I'd put that in there. It's St. Patrick's week, so in honor of that, we'll put
Good
that.
for you. Well,
yeah.
in your honor, they've dyed the river green here. So
I agree. So it's already in effect, eh?
You got it. Oh yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I think they probably did that over the weekend, and I don't know how long it takes to flush out, but
oh my gosh,
I don't think they're in much of a rush. So
yeah, that's a fun city, I would imagine, to be in around St. Patrick's Day. Dupes, let's get right into it. Look, obviously, first off, the fans out there, I see a lot of fans today, Kev, that are just sort of, oh my God, the sky is falling. The Bruins are horrible. What's going on? They don't look, and it's just like, get used to these games as far as I'm concerned, Dupes, because I don't think it's necessarily that they don't care about winning or they're just being, lazy or just kind of relaxed, but they're also, it's not the biggest objective right now. And while we care about it, and we will talk about it in a bit, about all the records they're breaking all the time, the history they're setting almost on a daily basis now, they just want to get the process right, Dupes, right? And that's sort of what this trip will be about and pretty much the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think some of what you're talking about is reflected a lot what I get from fans talking about. You can run all these and there's no shortage of positive stats in terms of most points, most wins, lead time. You can go down everything positive except the power play, and I suppose we could do a separate podcast on that. But there's all this weight of everything positive for very good reason.
Right.
Yesterday in Detroit. Jim Montgomery said, well, they weren't all that thrilled about, securing a playoff spot, whatever night that was, Saturday night. And I said to him, so you just sort of shrug it off? He said, yeah. He said, we sort of had a playoff spot clinched at Thanksgiving, which they did. They were 18-3. And as I told him, I said, I wish they'd given us that quote then.
Right.
So what I'm long way of saying, I get these constant responses, mostly on Twitter. None of it matters unless they win the cup. None of it matters unless they win the cup. I don't agree with that, but that's pretty much how people feel. That's how the fandom feels. And I think the degree of that among the players, which is nothing matters until they start the playoffs, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's important to see where they finish. And personally, I hope they don't get the Islanders just because I don't like going to the island. But, there's... by my eye, they should beat anybody in the league in a best of 7. Doesn't mean they will. We've seen too many times this thing goes upside down for a variety of reasons, be it goaltending or injury or the usual big ones. But what we're going to see here on this glide path is, I think, a lot. I'm not going to say indifferent hockey, but let's face it. We've seen enough playoffs, Murph, to know what that energy is at playoff time. There's nothing like it. So you can't replicate it now when all it's about now is, are they going to land in the 1 or 2 hole for the conference? Are they going to get Florida? Are they going to get the Islanders? Are they going to get Pittsburgh? Whomever. So that can't, they are professional. They're all of that, but they're also seasoned. They're veterans. They know the drill. And they know the energy it's going to take if they do get in a cup run here that last 2 months. Now is not the time to be wasting that energy.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'm going to show my age now, Deuce. Well, not with you, but with others watching right now. But I think back that team, I want to say it was 1993 when they got swept by Buffalo in the playoffs.
Oh, yeah.
And, that was one of when I was just growing up, watching the game, learning about the game, that was one of the first times where I realized how hard it is for these teams sometimes when they're so far ahead and they're just waiting for the playoffs to arrive, how hard it is to stay somewhat sharp on a daily basis. I mean, I get it. You don't want to fall into bad habits, but you're a human being. And that's what I think right now, like you said, you got to understand. And I think right now they look at Bergeron and they can sort of feed off him. And he's going to have off nights as well, but maybe, he'll be able to kind of pick them up and pick those spots where like, all right, let's get up for this game is sort of a test for what we're going to see ahead.
Yeah, and I think what you look at is challenges. There's always a challenge to keep the game tuned. There's always a challenge to do better on the power play, do better on the PK, whatever it is. Of course, they can't do better on the PK. They've been great all year. Their greatest challenge, frankly, is health. That's everybody's challenge across the board. Very difficult league. It was almost miraculous that they went 3 months there with the same 6 defensemen.
Yeah.
Unheard of today. So
and they lucked out with Carlo yesterday. I mean, on Sunday as well.
I think they did. Yeah. I think. What I found interesting about that is, for those who didn't watch, he went headfirst into the bottom of the boards there in the first minute.
I saw that.
Trying to bust up a breakaway. And he did finish out. That said, he was on the ice for 2 power play goals. They haven't given up 2 power play goals in months, since mid-December. He didn't look great. He didn't look awful. He played through. So, and then I asked for him twice at the end of the game, and they didn't make him available, and they wouldn't make him available. So that raises my suspicions. We're talking about a guy who's had 5 concussions. There's not a lot of leeway there. So I'll be intrigued tomorrow at the morning skate here in Chicago to see if indeed he's okay. They could pull him out just because they're saying they're in the rotation, but there's I won't say it's a red flag, but it's tinted that way at the moment.
Yeah.
So they got to stay healthy going in. Jim, I don't know how you felt. I felt their 2 biggest issues were goaltending. What did they really have in those 2? That's been unequivocally answered.
Yep.
Olmark's going to win the Vezina hands down, unless something really goes awry here over the final 4 or 5 weeks. However, the other big one was the ages of their 1-2 centers, Bergeron and Krejci, and we won't have that answer really until the playoffs are over for them. That said, so far they've been excellent. The Bergeron is Bergeron. You can set your clock by him in terms of how he plays. Krejci of late, his offense has softened up some. I think he's only had 1 goal in whatever it is, 4 or 5 weeks. Not that you judge centers necessarily by goals. So hand in hand with staying healthy is keeping those 2 centers primed, rested, ready to go. And it's a brutal, I keep going back to this, but that's the truth. It's a brutal playoff run. And when you're in your mid and late 30s, it's all the harder.
Yeah. And I think especially this year too, Dubes, the Eastern Conference. I mean, everybody's talking right now how weak the West is right now, and the East has got the Cup champ will come out of the East. But I kind of wonder, with the grind that whoever makes it out of the East has to go through, Dupes, to get to that Stanley Cup final, is a West team there just sort of waiting and, relatively or much more healthy than the team that comes out of the East. So, I understand that it's easy for Bruins fans to get carried away with themselves right now because of the season they've had. But get ready. I mean, things are going to change a lot in terms of the way the game's played, in terms of, like you just discussed, staying healthy. And that's going to be a big, I think the biggest factor. I'm not worried about Ullmark. I'm with you. I think he's proven himself, obviously. I think he'll do just fine in the playoffs. But I think the biggest thing is going to be health. And that's what fans need to realize. It's not going to be easy.
Right. The issues in the most recent years, because the health thing is always there. And they've got the health thing that is everybody's. They've got an age thing, which isn't everybody's. Some of that is counterbalanced, of course, by the fact that they've got all this great experience. What they're going to have to contend with is what I think in the West, to focus on that for a moment.
Right.
We really haven't seen the best of the Avalanche, obviously. We don't know if some of their key guys, Landeskog among them, is really going to be ready. But that could be a far better team than we've seen so far. They are the reigning Cup champ.
Exactly.
So there's that. And I have to tell you, I know they're flirting with a DNQ, but I like what Edmonton did at the trade deadline. Obviously they got the two greatest players, offensive players in the game, arguably the overall two best players in the game. I think Edmonton can. Hey, they made it to the semis last year. They could make a real run at this.
I'm with you, Tibbs. I think the biggest question mark now with them is Stuart Skinner and the goaltending.
Yes.
I think other than that, I agree with you. I think that they became much more playoff ready, even from the time when the Bruins played them, that Tuesday before the deadline. I mean, that was a much different team that you saw 9 days later here, just now this past Thursday in Boston.
Yes.
You can just tell in the way they carried themselves on the ice, the way there was almost a calming presence too that I noticed about them, where they would sort of fold before, but they kind of withstood things there and hung in, and then they struck.
Right. They've got Kane back in the lineup. That gives them a boost.
Yeah.
He can be trick or treat emotionally in terms of how he plays and the rest of it, but he is a good player. There's no question about that.
Right.
And to go back to that game you're talking about last Thursday, they beat the Bruins in Boston, and McDavid did almost nothing in terms of point production. So if they can win in Boston against the best team in the league, what has been the best team, and not have the greatest player in the game today deliver offensively, that alone says something about Edmonton.
Yeah, of course, that next game didn't look good for what we're saying right now, but right. I think they're going to be all right. They're trending in the right way. That's a team that scares me. But Dukes, let's get into this right now. One thing I was talking to you about off air, it's, you've seen, we'll say, a couple more teams than me in terms of the greatest Bruins teams. But I'm thinking back, I brought it up earlier with that season when they lost to Buffalo in the first round. I can think back to that 90 team that won the President's Trophy and then lost in 5 when Bill Ranford basically won the series by himself. But you go back a little more, and the teams that I'm starting to hear this Bruins team we're covering now in the same breath with, like the 76-77 Canadiens, I didn't get to see them play, Dupes, but I knew a lot about them because of my grandfather and my father, and just my wanting to research the game and learn about it, and just meeting people through the years that did see them, Russ Conway, or whether it be you or some people in Montreal as well, Pat Hickey. I don't know. It seems to me like that's a stretch, but I didn't see that team play, so I can't quite comment on that. Is that team just in another stratosphere, or is this Bruins team circling at least?
It's so hard to make these comparisons from generation or decade upon decade. I will say this. Obviously, it's a 32-team league now. It wasn't then. There were no it's not that there were none, but very few Europeans, no Russians at all. The Russians didn't come in until the late 80s. Didn't see the Czechs, didn't see the Scandinavians. Really, it's arguably a Canadian old boys club, really.
Right.
And the Canadiens were stacked. The Bruins had great teams. The Bruins went to the finals there with them in the late 70s, repeatedly, or semis, couple of finals. Came up short in that whole run from 1943 to 1989, where they couldn't get past Canadians in the playoffs. Not every year, but it did span those 45 or 46 years.
Right.
It's almost, for me, it's impossible to draw straight on comparisons. The 71 team of the Bruins that lost early to Canadiens.
Yep.
Yeah, and Dryden, and just if you go back and look at the names and the buildings also were a factor, because the buildings weren't all 85 by 200. The Garden had that small neutral zone. So there were all these sort of quirks and niches of the era that I don't really think you can make a comparison, because you can't have lineups that are stacked that deep with players in the Hall of Fame. Just start there, right?
Right.
If you look at the current Bruin team, Bergeron will be in the Hall of Fame. I think you can make a case for Krejci. Once you get by there, I don't know. I mean, that of course that's a barroom argument, for decades to come.
Yeah.
You look at these other teams and rosters, or anybody stacked like that. You can't because there are too many teams, and because of the cap. When you do get a good team, you've got to tear it apart. So,
right.
The last of the great teams I think we saw were with those Red Wings teams and those, and to a degree, Pittsburgh and Edmonton. I think those were the teams that were, in my mind, cuts above.
Okay.
There was an argument, frankly, Murph, when the Islanders, I was working in New York and covered the last Islander team that won it in 83.
Oh,
So
wow.
they won 80, 80, 81, 82, and 83, 4 straight cups, and then it segued over to the Oilers. There were a lot of people, and I was among them, who felt that the Islander team is as great as they were for 4 consecutive cups.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't see them as up there. Well, now you go back and look at that roster. They were up. Billy Smith, and Potvin, and Trottier, and Gillies, and Nystrom. I mean, they were loaded, and you can't do it today.
Yeah, one thing and again, I didn't get to see all those teams as closely as you, but the one thing I noticed, and I wonder if you agree with me in the difference between that and leading to what you're saying right now, is everything is so much more system oriented. And this is not to discredit what this Bruins team is doing right now. It's not to discredit the skill they have. I'm just saying that I think a team that maybe is less skilled, because it's so system oriented, and if you get that system, you can maintain it and it works, you can kind of go above where maybe people expected you to be a little more often.
I think so. I think it was especially true. How do I frame this? Especially true before the offense started to come back.
Yeah.
We're seeing more goals, but yeah, you could, Devils, perfect example. And of course, the Devils too had some very good players in that line. Marty Brodeur, Hall of Fame. Scotty Stevens, Hall of Fame. Patrick Elias, a tremendous player. Bobby Holik, all those guys. So yes, but I would say what's consistent within your idea there of play a certain way, be faithful to it, is you got to have the goaltending, because if you don't, you don't. I mean, look at the Bruins team that won in 11. Why did they win? Really, what really boiled down to is Tim Thomas.
Yep.
They had a lot of great players in there. Bergeron, one of them, Chara. But if Thomas isn't Thomas the way he was, they don't win.
No.
And that definitely today, if you don't have it, and I think that's always been the case, you've got to have at least solid, good goaltending. You look at what Tommy Fitz has gone through in Edmonton, in New Jersey. They didn't have goaltending last year. He finally gets it this year. Not that it's great. It's really good, Vanacek.
I'm actually a fan of him, though. I think that kid can win a round or two.
Yes. Sure he can.
Yeah.
Sure he can. And especially if surrounded, they've got great young forwards. I thought going in that I didn't think they'd be this good, but I thought they definitely challenged for a playoff spot, and they've really lit it up.
So dudes, just getting back to sort of the teams over history here, then I'll we'll specify more on the Bruins. What was, whether they won the cup or not, the best Bruins team you covered?
Well, I started in the late 70s, so I really have a fondness for those teams with McNabb and Milbury. Cashman was still there. Frankly, Busick was still playing when I came aboard. So I enjoyed those teams. Brad Park was at the end because his knees had given out. He did play a year or two more in Detroit after he left Boston. But Middleton was a joy to watch. Barry Peterson. Neely came along later, and Neely came along in 86. But that transition period of where Cherry had them as that lunch pail crew, then it went over to Creighton, Freddie Creighton, and Jerry Cheevers. That was an engaging group, entertaining, fun watching them play. It was still the fighting era. And I know, I've bought full on into the fighting's no good for the game, but I loved it. I still love a good fight. But
I'm with you.
We're in the century we're in, right? And if you're going to market a sport, what was it? Just the other night, there was that fight with not Edmonton. Was it Arizona and Minnesota where the two guys were standing? Reeves and the other kid who I don't know well at all. It looked like a charade. When it's two guys who are really, really cheesed off at each other, and they go, that's still entertainment in my book.
Yep.
But you can't try to market a league today and still have that. That's just somewhat the sad truth in it. So to answer your question, if I'm rattling on here, those teams in the late 70s, before a whole lot of things happened, before the game changed so dramatically, were my favorites to cover. Were they the most talented? Probably not. But the drama of seeing them lose, too many men on the ice at the Forum, all of that, and the head-to-head battles with Canadiens were just, it was great entertainment. Yeah,
and let's hope that team can get back into it eventually there. I mean, I know they're in the rebuild right now, but
yes, it's a better league. It's certainly better. It's better for Boston when Canadiens are good. And it's so sad now because being in that old building when they were on and they had those guys and they attacked with speed like nobody attacked with speed.
Right.
And the building there were nights in that old building at the Forum. I thought the roof really was going to come down. They were rabid, right? And they knew the drill. they had seen them. There was they were so accustomed to the winning.
Yeah.
And I know from a Boston fan perspective, that was really hard to swallow, but you had also to admire it.
Yep. No, I think it did. I mean, like I said, I was raised by my grandfather who grew up watching those teams too, and my dad, and they did. I mean, you could tell when they would tell us about it that there was something special about that bunch. And I got to cover the 2011 team there and that run to the cup.
Yep.
There was a good special feeling about that team. They were a little bit of a throwback. I think that maybe you could kind of throw back to that era a bit. And the Bruins had that going for a while. So we'll see what happens now. But as far as this, in terms of my career, Dukes, in terms of greatness, I'd have to say I haven't seen a team where it almost reminds me of the Patriots when they were starting off their Super Bowl run and their dynasty. And they were way more into the team aspect, the defense, and then go out from there. And obviously that's the goalie and then on out in hockey. And that's what that reminds me of right now. That's why I went to on this is I just don't see him as skilled as some of those other greater teams, but this team is a team. And that's why I think they do have a good chance. I really do.
Yeah, no, there's a good vibe about them. And I agree wholeheartedly. They're a good bunch, which I guess to a degree is neither here nor there, whether they're good guys or not, but they are.
Yeah.
They do like each other. My point within that is if there's good chemistry in the room, teams like, and most of all, who you're playing for the guy next to you. You don't want to disappoint the guy on your line, the next line up, all of that. That's sort of a hockey truism that you don't always see today. And you can see teams that don't have that. This one does. So that does make them more engaging. On a talent level, are they out there? No, but given what today's game is and the salary cap, they're engineered far better than I thought going into the season. When I figured they would be somewhere in that wild card hunt. And that said, give Don Sweeney credit. He went out here and made some very prudent moves that make them an even better team. They were very good going along, but I love the Orlov acquisition. I've watched them pick up a number of high-profile defensemen over the years, be it Gonchar, Iafrate, last year with Lindholm. This guy's a different animal, if you will, in terms of what he can deliver. All those guys that I mentioned are, but for this team right now, I think he's been the perfect acquisition for the back.
Yeah, I do too, and I like the depth that Hathaway brings as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just the fact both guys have won a cup too. I mean, it's no lie. We know sometimes it seems like they're just feeding us a little there when the coach will say that or Sweeney will say that, but it does mean a lot when these kids on the team see that many Stanley Cup rings around them, and when they know that these guys have been through the grind. I think it does hold a lot of value and help a team, obviously, at this time of the year.
We were saying that when Sean Thornton had a ring from Anaheim and was part of part of the frolic here. There was an asterisk to that, which is Hathaway was still in Calgary when Washington won.
That's right. Yep.
But Orlov definitely. They've got rings in the room, of course, with Krejci and Bergeron. So yeah, they also an element. But I say one thing they have in line with your thinking there is they've got Bergeron. Bergeron is the class act of the league.
Yeah.
Has a firm grasp and grip of that room. So that ultimately could be worth as much as what we talked about earlier in terms of having Tim Thomas 12 years. It's hard to believe it's 12 years. Tim Thomas, 12 years.
Jeez. I can't believe that's level.
Yeah.
All right. Make me feel a little dupes, but there we go. Hey, listen, always a pleasure, my friend. I know you got to go, and I appreciate you taking the time here, Dupes. And yeah, I think we could be in for a deep run. We'll say that. I don't know where it goes, but it's going to be deep. That's the way I get this team now.
Yeah, I always preface it by should be. Where I started talking here, they should beat, or they should beat anybody they go up against in 4 out of 7. I think it's a little more difficult. It's been a while now when they were 5-game series. Actually, for a couple of years, there were 3-game series to start. Wow. You can get bushwhacked in that for whatever. You just have a couple of big flus. There's flu in the room or something.
Yeah.
Over 7 games, this team has proven. Let's face it, they've got the talent. Now, I will say too, easy for us to dismiss Carolina. We shouldn't. Carolina's given them some fits. Carolina also an excellent team. So that could be a bugaboo, but the way the math is working at the moment, that wouldn't happen until down the line.
Yeah, and I also look at Jersey. I'm telling you, Dupes, there's something about that team. I feel like that Russian goalie they brought up, if he gets hot at the right time, they're going to ride him. And I mean, considering the health problems they always have with their other 2 goalies, that could be the key there. So Jersey, I just think they're tough. I think Carolina's tough. Speed with them will be an issue. And you and I were texting about this before. I think that could be an issue for a team like the Bruins. As good as the Bruins are, the speed of those 2 teams could create a lot of problems in a 7-game series. So I don't think it's not a guarantee, but I think they should, like you said, they should go further into the playoffs and have a legit chance at the Cup. So
and I think when we will all end up, you'll be doing this too. Okay, playoff predictions. Now the 16 teams, and you're looking at the matchups.
Yeah,
I think when you're looking for a tipping point, when you do that deciphering, the tipping point is always going to be Ullmark.
Yeah,
right now that's the truth, and that's right now that is. I mean, he has been unbelievable.
Yep, I'm with you. Well, Dupes, thanks for taking the time, my friend. Enjoy Chicago, and I'll see you when you get back.
I'll look forward to doing it again. Thanks, Murph.
All right, Dupes. Kevin Paul Dupont here on the Boston Hockey Now podcast. I'm Jimmy Murphy. We'll talk to you next week.